Excuse my voice. I think the wind took it. So welcome to the May 7th, 2024 Public Services Committee meeting. Couple of housekeeping items. If you have a phone, please either mute it or turn it off. If you're going to approach to speak, please touch the red button on the podium so it turns on the mic and identify yourself. At that point, Jennifer, first item.
Number 7, ordinance third reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from MUB, mixed use business emphasis, to CB, community business, for land located at Lot 2, Block 1, QB subdivision.
Okay, staff report, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. This application proposes changing a parcel that is approximately right next door to King Soopers off of Dell Range and Ridge, between Ridge and College. The lot is proposed to go to CB zoning, mostly for design standards. Realistically, most of the lots in the area are already CB in terms of how they're built form. The Planning Commission recommended approval of this item. And this is approved last time the council met. There's no further updates, but I am available for any questions.
Okay, any questions for Seth? Questions for Seth? Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, so my understanding with the change in design standards is the amount of setbacks and things that differ from the existing zoning, correct?
Correct. One of the main points of the MUB zoning would be to bring the building closer to the street. In this case, we've got a underdeveloped dirt road to the north called Greg Way. The MUB zone would force them to build their building much closer to Greg Way and also put windows facing onto Greg Way, which is not necessarily the most conducive for a automobile repair type facility.
All right, so that makes sense. And my understanding is they will have no access, from Greg Way, or no frontage other than the back of the store on Greg Way. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, through you, they have given us preliminary layouts for what they're proposing to do at this location. They are proposing to utilize the internal access ways to the south and no vehicular access to the north, although I believe there will be a pedestrian connection going north-south through the block at that location.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions from committee? Okay, public comment. Public comment? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay. Jennifer, next item.
Number 8, ordinance third reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, High Plains Road, beginning at South Greeley Highway and terminating at Division Avenue.
Okay, staff report.
Hello, for the record, Sophia Mays, Planning and Development. This annexation is for about 7.23 acres of land, beginning at South Greeley Highway and terminating at Division Avenue. It's about 8.3% contiguous to city limits and is directly adjacent to High Plains Business Park, the location of Project Cosmo. And it is currently on third and final reading. I stand for any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Okay, thank you. Any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, all those hearing none, may I have a motion? I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Okay.
Can I just remind you guys to use your microphones when making a motion? Thank you. Number 9, ordinance third reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, land located east of Saratoga Street and west of Whitney Road.
Okay, staff report.
For the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The annexation before you is for land that is located just east of Saratoga and west of Whitney Road. This does include Laramie Street as well, the full length of it in that area. This annexation has been heard prior and is on third reading, was approved by council on second reading, and I stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Okay, public comment. Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve on third and final reading.
Second.
So a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from committee? Questions or yes.
Mr. Chairman, I probably should have asked this of staff earlier, but we are creating a county pocket. Is there been any discussions with the other landowner about eventually inclusion into the city?
Chair, through you. Yes, we are creating a county pocket. We have not discussed any potential annexations down the line with this landowner. Our department is focused on the other county pockets that we already have listed from basically what we had prior to this annexation happening. So this would come much later down the line. But we have not talked with this property owner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any other comments or questions from committee? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Number 10, ordinance third reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of AR agricultural residential for land annexed to the city of Cheyenne located east of Saratoga Street and south of and adjacent to Laramie Street.
Staff report.
Again, for the record, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The assigned zoning before you, it's for the annexation that was just prior. Again, when we annex property, we do need to give it a city zone. The current county zone is AR agricultural residential. So that is what staff is proposing for when it comes into city limits as being AR. There is no current proposed development for this parcel. So there is no zone change at this time, but if there is going to be development on this parcel, most likely it will require zone change, and that's when you'll see that come before you again. But right now, staff just recommends approval of the assigned zoning to AR agricultural residential.
Okay.
And I stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Okay, any public comment? Public comment. Hearing none, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a
Second.
second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Number 11, ordinance third reading, annexing to the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming, land located at 4204 Dell Range Boulevard.
Staff report.
Hello, I'm Athen Morse, Planning and Development. This is for the annexation of 4204 Dell Range. The applicant is requesting for the annexation of this property for city services, primarily the sewer. This land is 100% contiguous to city limits. And in our past, excuse me, in the past commission meeting, this was passed as well. I have no additional info regarding the project. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Okay, any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion is second, so any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Number 12, ordinance third reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, establishing the zoning classification of city MR medium density residential for land annexed to the city of Cheyenne located at 4204 Dell Range Boulevard.
Staff report.
Hello again, for the record, Athen Morse, Planning and Development. This is for the zone classification from the previous item we just discussed, 4204 Dell Range. It is currently listed as county medium density residential, and we would like to, or the applicant would like to get it switched to city medium density residential. There's no new additional info on this as well. I'm available for any questions.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Any public comment? Public comment? Hearing none, may I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion is second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Number 13, ordinance third reading, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from CB, community business, to P, public district for land located at Lot 1, Cheyenne Ice and Event Center, second filing located at 1530 West Lincoln Way.
Okay, staff report, please.
All right, last time, I'm Athen Morse with Planning and Development. And this is for the changing the zone for the Ice and Event Center from CB Community Business to Public Zone District. This is to match the neighboring gymnastics facility so that they are under the same district. I have no new additional info on this and am available for questions.
Okay, any questions or comments from committee? Questions from committee? Any public comment? Okay, no public comment. Okay, hearing none, hearing none, may I have a motion.
Move to approve on third reading. Second.
I have a motion, a second. Any comments or questions from committee? Comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Number 14, ordinance, second reading, amending sections 1.4.3 defined terms and 5.8.8 accessory buildings of the Unified Development Code, clarifying detached buildings.
Staff report.
Chair and members of the committee, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. So the text amendment before you, it looks at making some modifications for detached buildings, basically our accessory buildings, detached buildings on a residential property. So the first part of it is looking at the definition for detached building, just making a small change into that definition. Right now, the definition is a building having no common wall connection with another building. Basically, what we're doing with that is changing it so that it says a building having no common wall or structural attachment with another building. This makes it much clearer with what a building being detached is. The second part is adding a new section into our accessory building regulations that basically would require any accessory building to have any part of that building be a certain distance from another building to count as its own building. So as an example, if you have your house and then you're going to place a shed on your property, that shed must be a certain distance from the house to be counted as an accessory building for setback purposes and also following our accessory building regulations. If that shed is adjacent to the house, it's going to count as part of the principal building when it comes to setbacks. So a home has a 20-foot rear setback. If you place that shed at the back of the house and it is adjacent to the house or within a certain distance, which I'll go over the distances that we kind of have laid out, both in the staff report and what Planning Commission had recommended. But basically, if that shed is within that distance to the house, say Planning Commission recommended that these buildings have to be 5 feet apart. So if that shed is closer than 5 feet to the house, it's going to require it to be 20 feet also from your rear property line. It'll have to match the principal building setbacks. Otherwise, detached structures do have a different setback to the rear property line if they are completely detached in a certain distance, which would be in some cases on certain lots, it would be 5 feet from your rear property line. So when we took this to Planning Commission, staff was originally proposing the separation distance to be 1 foot. So any building that is 1 foot from another building would then be counted as detached. Planning Commission, when we went through this process and had the public hearing, they did recommend and change it to 5 feet. Staff does believe that the 5 foot distance could cause a lot more issues on a property. Things can get a lot tighter for homeowners. It might be harder to place an accessory building, at least with the 1 foot. Staff would have an easier time of having that enforcement of what is actually detached. So going into why we're even looking at this, my first example, this was basically built. It was supposed to be a detached garage. On the plot plan, it's adjacent to the house. They were saying it was going to be separated by just a couple inches, but we didn't have anything in code that said a couple inches wasn't detached. It wasn't sharing a common wall connection. It was proposed to be detached. When it was built, well, it's attached. So we have these issues where now the setbacks are completely off. It's not meeting setbacks, but it did get a building permit. That permit was signed off by a planner back when this was approved. Because at the time, the planner wasn't aware that it was supposed to be fully detached and they added some additional documents after its original proposal or approval. And then the next documents added something additional that the planner didn't catch. And now we have not a detached garage, but an attached garage. That's not meeting a 20-foot rear setback. So with this amendment, by having that 1-foot separation from any part of the building, it will be clear that you have a 1-foot gap. And that is from eaves. That's from any part of the building. So if you have eaves coming off the house and off of that shed, those eaves have to be 1 foot apart from each other. That'll be much easier to enforce and regulate to make sure that the buildings are actually detached and not attached. So that we don't end up with situations where now could there be a fire hazard because this is too close to the property line? Another example, this is a very old shed. So yes, it was built back in the day, but you can see that little gap up towards the top. It's a couple inches. Further up, it is attached to the house. So there's another example of kind of things that we look at. And then the last one, same thing. What was proposed to be a detached structure. It's basically between the house and the property line. It's now clearly physically attached to the house, but it was proposed to be detached. So these situations do come up from time to time. But as staff, when we have to review these, to have something clear in the code that we can clearly enforce is much more helpful. So that's why we propose the 1 foot separation. So with any of these, if they were required to have that 1 foot separation, then you would be able to clearly tell that it is clearly detached and it would have to meet our accessory building setbacks and regulations. Or if it's within that 1 foot, then we're going to basically say that it is part of your principal building or your house for setback purposes. But then that also means it doesn't have to meet all the accessory building regulations. It just has to meet principal building setbacks. But then we'll have that clear stance that we can take with these accessory buildings. Planning Commission did hear this item. They did recommend approval, but as I mentioned, they did recommend changing that 1 foot separation to be 5 feet. Staff would recommend the 1 foot separation. So if the governing body feels the 1 foot separation is better than the 5 foot, it can be amended back to be 1 foot. With that, I do stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee?
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
Councilman?
I understand, I think what you're saying in terms of the process of review. I'm actually familiar with both those cases by coincidence. I'm really wondering what the benefit is to the property and to the people that might want to do whatever accessory building they want to do. That 1 foot seems to me to be useless. I mean, it's good for your process, but in terms of the process of the property itself, you can't walk through it. You can't store anything in it. Of course, I guess that's another issue, but I really believe that the 5 foot, and of course, obviously, it's many different situations and many different cases, but I believe that 1 foot is probably better for a review. But in practical terms, I don't understand how that's a benefit to the property owner. So if you want to speak to that, that'd be good.
So Mr. Chair, through you. So the 1 foot is a minimum. It's basically just saying that for your building to be classified as an accessory building or a detached structure, it needs to be a minimum of 1 feet from any other building on your property. It's not saying that you have to be 1 foot. It's just giving a minimum so that if you're closer than 1 foot to your house, it is no longer an accessory building. So like for this example of the detached garage, that is closer than 1 foot to the house. It would no longer be considered a detached garage. They could push the garage to be 3 feet from the house, 5 feet from the house. As long as it's not within that 1 foot, then it won't be considered part of the house for setback purposes. So it's not stating that somebody has to make it a foot, because we do understand, I mean, obviously with a foot, it could be challenging to put anything there. The walls are most likely gonna be about 3 feet from each other. Just from building standards, because eaves are maybe a foot for an eave. So if the eaves have to be a foot apart, so you have an eave on the house and the shed, and then you've got the foot between them. So you might have about 3 feet to your walls. That does allow for room to walk, but we're not saying that has to be your spacing. You can go greater than that. So if you want to have that room between the shed and the house, then put the shed farther from the house. It's just saying that if you're closer than that 1 foot, your setbacks are gonna be completely different for the shed. So I hope that kind of answers that question. Being this is on second reading, I can even come up with a diagram or come up with some drawings for next time we come back to committee, if that would help, or I can come up with something and then send it to you directly if that helps as well.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Laborn.
so my question is there any, and this is just coming to my mind, is there any consideration of the fire department and their interest in this?
And Mr. Chair, through you, so we did talk with both the fire department and the building department. One of the reasons we are doing this as well is the last example I even gave, that's right at the property, its side property line. There are requirements when it comes to building code and fire code when you're within 5 feet of your property line, if it's attached to the principal building, if it's part of the house, if it's a shed or something that's placed next to the property line that's under 200 square feet and things like that. My understanding is there isn't anything in building and fire code that really has anything to do with the fire separation. But once it becomes part of the house itself, there are a lot more strict requirements for fire rating. And that's one of the things with looking at this, it would prevent situations like this where you have something jammed between the house and the side property line, because our setbacks won't allow it. The side setback on this property would be 5 feet. So if this is attached to the house, it needs to be 5 feet from the side property line, not at a 0 foot side setback. So that's one of the things with this text amendment that kind of helps that. Same thing with the detached garage. That should be a 20 foot rear setback. I believe they had it at 5 feet. So fire rating might not be as much of an issue here. Because they are 5 feet is usually the building code and fire code for when fire rating kind of jumps in. But we did talk with both the building department and fire department. They're fine with the changes we're proposing.
Any follow-
Mr. Chair, this is Seth Lloyd with the Planning and Development Department. I just wanted to add one little thing to that. The fire code and building code generally don't require fire separation between two buildings on the same parcel. So there is no required distance between two buildings that share a parcel together with each other. So that 5 foot separation that triggers fire rating, that's to the property line, not to another building on the same parcel. There is no building or fire code standard between two buildings on the same parcel.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rennie?
So going back to Connor to the building, the site plan that you had shown there. Okay, so the garage, I presume that was supposed to be detached is on the, if that, let's say if that's oriented north-south, it's on the east side or the right-hand side.
It's the white box.
Oh.
So it's this.
Over there, okay.
Yes.
I thought that was just part of the lot.
Okay, so that's the detached garage.
And the issue is that it's too close to the the lot on
Correct.
the left-hand side?
Yeah,
Okay.
so technically we would count
Alright.
the front of this lot to be when you're looking at this, the right-hand side. So where it says the 70 foot right of way,
Mhm.
we'd count that as the front. And then the rear of the property would be on the left-hand side where that detached garage is.
Okay.
So for the house itself, its setbacks would be 25 feet from that eastern property line, so the 70 foot right of way property line. It would have a 20 foot rear setback from where the alley is.
Okay.
With the garage being attached, the garage should have had a 20 foot rear setback from that property line.
Okay, and honestly, I have to say the rear setback, I mean, if it seems to be flush with the rest of the house, I'm not sure that is important. I mean, that doesn't bother me so much, but the left-hand side setbacks, I can see where that could be an issue. I do have two questions, Mr. Chairman. One, if could Mr. White provide us a synopsis of the discussions on planning and what their rationale was when they came to the 5-foot agreement or side?
Mr. Chair, I can definitely kind of put that together and get that to the committee
Okay.
for the next committee meeting.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I guess the other question I have is if you do have a detached garage that's 5+ feet away with the connecting sidewalk and the homeowner builds a cover over the sidewalk between the two, does that mean it's structurally attached?
Mr. Chair, through you, that is correct, and we already treat it that way under current code.
Okay.
So under current code, there have been situations where somebody wanted to basically get around our accessory building regulations. So what they do is they physically attach it to the house by doing like a covered walkway from the house to the garage, but then it needs to be principal building setbacks. So generally, we only see that happen when it's going to be a new detached garage somebody's building because they want it to be a bigger size. They want to make it 2 stories. They want to basically not meet the accessory building regulations, so they'll physically attach it to the house. So we have already reviewed them as if you have any structural component that attaches it, it becomes attached. That's how we've interpreted our current code. What we have in here would actually make that part of the code and a lot clearer and stricter that that's what we've been interpreting, basically.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, briefly, recently we passed these small lots. How will this affect that development as it percolates in the community?
So what this would do is it potentially, depending how small the lot is and how much the house takes up that lot, it could make it challenging depending on the size of accessory building that somebody wants to build on that lot.
So we would, in that case, we would be better off with a 1 foot instead of a 5-foot separation.
Mr. Chair, through you, that would be correct. The 1 foot would make it easier in that case because then if you're saying that somebody has to have their accessory building at least 5 feet from the principal building, well, if it's within that 5 feet and they need a 20-foot rear setback on the accessory building now, but say the house is already at 20 foot for their rear setback, they can't have that accessory building. So the 1 foot would make it easier for those smaller lots. This might also be something, depending on what direction council decides to go, that might just have to be a factor that developers put into when they're basically platting their lots to make sure that if somebody wants an accessory building, they're going to have to make sure that the lots can accommodate that as well.
Mr. Chair, one final please.
Go ahead.
So I'm reading your report and I believe I'm reading it to say that it's 1 foot. So if we just move to approve, it's going to be the 1 foot rather than the 5 foot. We would have to amend to make it the 5 foot. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, through you, you would have to amend it because Planning Commission recommended approval of the text amendment with the amendment to make it 5 feet. So what is in front of the governing body is an ordinance that has the 5 foot suggestion in there. So you would have to amend it back to 1 foot, which was staff's original proposed recommendation. So it would need to be amended, and then I could have that amended ordinance if it is amended and approved as the amendment.
So
Go ahead.
what's in front of us is 5 feet.
Mr. Chair, through you, correct. What is in front of council right now is the 5 foot,
What's in there?
which is what Planning Commission had recommended. So that's what we brought forward. But staff had talked it over and we believe that the 1 foot would be better for the community because, again, going back to Councilman Seagrave's question, smaller lots, it could make things a lot more challenging if you start pushing that 5 foot.
Mr. Chair, I'm
I believe I want to make an amendment to the 1 foot recommendation. I think it gives folks more flexibility, depending on their lot size. As was pointed out by staff, it doesn't have to be a foot. It could be 5 feet. It's just a minimum of a foot. And I think it would help folks. Maybe some of the older homes in town on smaller lots and apparently we're going to build a bunch of new homes on small lots. So for that reason, I would like to go ahead and make a motion.
We're still in questions.
Oh,
to staff.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay,
We're getting close.
okay, I'll shut up.
Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director, if I could just interject some comments real quick. One thing with the 1 foot is it does allow for administrative flexibility. Say someone could reduce it by 50% up to 6 inches. A lot of times you'll see these accessory buildings that might be purchased at a large hardware store like Lowe's or Home Depot, where property owner gets it, gets dropped off, plopped down, pushed up as close as you can to your house or wherever. So a lot of your neighbors may actually have conditions where their accessory buildings may be within a foot. One of the concerns with the 5 feet was the fact that most accessory buildings under 200 feet, we never see a permit for those whatsoever. They appear one day. They're exempt from building code review. So we want to try to prevent having situations where neighbors will be arguing or creating problems that could last for years. So when you are looking at reducing that separation, we did initially recommend 1 foot. That does allow for some administrative flexibility for those cases where they may be closer. But you're welcome to identify any measurement that you all feel is acceptable.
Okay. Any questions of Charles? Okay. Any further questions from committee? Any public up here or public comment? No? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion from committee?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated earlier, I believe the 1 foot would accommodate more folks. And I don't know that it would hurt anybody. If you have a big enough lot and you want it 5 or 10 feet, you could still do that. So that's kind of where my thinking is on it.
So are you making an amendment for 1 foot?
Well, I thought I'd see if there was any other comments before I stick my neck out there.
Any further
Mr.
comment from
Chairman?
committee? Yes, Councilman.
I'd like to follow up on some of the points that have been made here, particularly about the planning commission. So that perhaps, and did I understand from staff correctly that they were prepared to bring a substitute that would do the 1 foot instead of the 5?
Mr. Chair, through you, if that amendment does get passed today, I will have a substitute basically prepared for that. And yes, I can go back and I will listen to the planning commission recording to make sure I got a basically detailed response for you as to why they chose to go with that 5 feet.
Any further follow-ups? Okay, Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the councilman from Ward 1 in that I think that 1 foot space is totally unusable and non-functional. So I don't know that I don't know that I can support from going from 5 feet back to administration's recommendation of 1 foot. I guess I have to talk to my colleague from Ward 2. Maybe there's a distance in the middle we can agree on. And I have an issue with, to me, if you build a detached garage or a detached shop and you just cover the walkway, I have an issue with that being considered making it all one structure. To me, I think it's obvious the intent was just to create a protected walkway. So I don't know if staff can, if they would entertain an amendment, if they think it'd be functional, as long as you put not an enclosed structural attachment. Because to me, a breezeway doesn't make the buildings attached, so. Those are my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments from committee? And I'm just to add my 2 cents. And I'd like to see the synopsis of that planning commission's meeting before I make any decisions on 1 foot or 5 foot.
Mr. Chair, we could do this 2 weeks from now if we need to, we want to, so it's not critical to do it today, is it? For anybody? Okay, I won't make the amendment today and we'll study it.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments from committee?
We'll push it down the road.
Any further comments from committee? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, next item.
Number 15, ordinance second reading, amending ordinance number 4519, amending the official zoning map of the city of Cheyenne, changing the zoning classification from HI heavy industrial to AG agricultural and county A-2 to LI light industrial for land located west of Burlington Trail and south of and adjacent to HR Ranch Road.
Okay, staff report.
Chair, members, committee, Counterweight Planning and Development Department. The ordinance before you, it's a corrective ordinance. So a little bit background on this. This is for a Microsoft data center site over off of HR Ranch Road. Back, I don't remember the exact date, but this was basically the original zone change was approved by council. It did come through and get that zone change approved. The issue with it was that in the original ordinance, basically we had a different subdivision that was listed in there because their administrative plat, which I have up on the screen, was not approved at the time. This was still going through the administrative plat review through our office, and they ended up changing the subdivision name. So when the zoning ordinance went through, it did not have the correct subdivision name, so technically we actually rezoned some other random parcels with that original ordinance. So this is a corrective ordinance to make sure that the correct parcel for the Microsoft data center is zoned properly. So that's all this ordinance is. So staff would recommend approval of this corrective ordinance so that we can get this lot the correct zoning.
So the random lots that we rezoned, what happens to those?
I don't think we've changed, Chair through you, I don't think we've changed the zoning map on those. So they'll just stay as they were originally zoned. So nothing's gonna happen with those. They'll stay as originally zoned. This ordinance will just correct that ordinance to make sure that this correct lot has the zoning it's supposed to have.
Okay, any questions from committee? Questions from committee? Okay, any public comment? Public comment? Nobody? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion?
Second?
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from committee? Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor? Signify, oh, sorry, Councilman Labor.
I was just turning it on to satisfy
Oh, okay.
staff.
Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Yeah,
Number 16, ordinance second reading, amending subsection 6.5.4.B.3 incentives bonus 6.5.4.B.4 creative sign program and 6.5.8.J billboards of the Unified Development Code to restructure sign incentives and bonuses by modifying allowances for signs near interstate highways, allowances for shared signs, eliminating the creative sign program, and clarifying applicability of certain billboard allowances.
okay, staff issue, or staff report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd. I'm with the City of Cheyenne Planning and Development Department. This amendment proposes changing just a portion of the sign code for clarifications on a few matters, all relevant to incentives and bonuses when it comes to signs. realistically, the entire sign code could use some updates, but we're not, that's a major undertaking, so we're just going to take this little portion that addresses some more immediate, more pressing concerns. The first is near interstate signs. Right now in the Unified Development Code, your maximum height is 20 feet and your maximum area is 70 square feet. That is the maximum allowed for a sign anywhere in the community, including along the interstates. So the example on the screen right now is Bish's RV. They maxed out their allowances and didn't go for a variance or any other sort of relief. And so that's the biggest sign you can get in this community adjacent to the interstate without some sort of relief process. Another example we have here, this is a grandfathered sign. This is the pilot sign at Camp Stool. They actually recently redid their sign to shrink their top identifier sign. And so the height is 58 feet. I believe it was 60 feet and now it's 58 feet. Overall height, the area of all signs on that post put together is 326 square feet, which is much larger than the 70 square feet that is currently allowed. However, as a grandfathered sign, they are allowed to make some modifications without coming into compliance with our code. Next sign, as an example, is the Toyota sign up against I-25. This sign did get a variance for height, so it's 35 feet high instead of 20 feet high. It does meet the area, which is 70 square feet or less for that logo there. We also recently had an application for Maverick. They're building a new facility off of Camp Stool Road near I-80. They originally came in with a sign that measured something along the lines of 1,800 square feet. But through various conversations with staff and with the Board of Adjustment, the variance that they received was 56 feet in height and 300 square feet in area. And the Board of Adjustment recognizing that a near interstate sign is a condition that probably should elicit some ability to actually communicate with the interstate. They also received a variance for EMC allowances. The Board of Adjustment thought that a EMC reader board was an essential part of a gas station signage, so they gave them the variance to allow the EMC to be 50% of the total sign area, whereas currently the code only allows you 25% of your allowed sign area. The Planning Commission, in discussing interstate signage, found this sign very helpful in determining how big of a sign to allow. This is the Menards sign. This is a master sign, but each row is 100 square feet. So the Menards sign is 100 square feet, the Chick-fil-A sign is 100 square feet, the Firestone and the blank space is another 100, et cetera. So the grand total is 400 square feet for this sign. The top two would be 200, just the top row by itself is 100 square feet. So that gives you an idea when you're thinking about what allowance we might give an interstate sign in terms of area. Probably all of you are familiar with this sign. It's right there on Del Range, very central to the community. In looking at how big of a sign we should allow, staff researched some various recommended sign codes. One of them was very forthright and very transparent in terms of the assumptions they made, why they were calculating, what things they were calculating, assumptions such as speed limit, road width, environmental complexity, and number of letters needed. I won't go into too much detail on those, but if they are in the staff report, if you want to look at them. In doing that calculation, we can see that a sign that has a speed limit near a road with a speed limit of 75 miles per hour, a road width of roughly 10 lanes wide, environmental complexity of 0, meaning there's not a lot of trees or other things to catch the eye, and number of letters needed, 16, gives you a minimum sign area of about 150 square feet and about 65-ish feet in height. Right now, our billboard allowance is only 60 feet high. So in order to kind of match the billboard allowance, staff's proposal for the near interstate signs is 60 feet in height. And then the Planning Commission settled on 200 square feet. We're open to any suggestions as far as if council wants to go larger or smaller, but that's kind of where staff's recommendation ended up, and Planning Commission, after debate, also settled on the 200 square feet. So that is what's currently in the ordinance in front of you. The second section is master signs or shared signs. These signs consolidate a bunch of signs into one sign. So for example, the Menards sign is considered a master sign. The sign at the Pershing Plaza is considered a master sign. You can see the Menards sign has at least 4, probably at least 5. We could really realistically say there's going to be at least five tenants on that sign. The Pershing Plaza sign, we got a whole bunch of people all on that one sign. Can you imagine if each of these individual people had their own ground sign? This reduces sign clutter, but also communicates your destination. So in doing that, we have that in our code right now, but we don't have any defined bonus for it. It just says, hey, do this and reduce sign clutter, but doesn't give any defined bonus. So different staff at different eras have taken different routes to approve these master signs. One time it was administrative use approval. One time it was a variance approval. A third time it was a creative sign approval. This is the Deneen building. They use the creative sign process to get a master sign. So staff is putting some language in code to try and give a defined bonus to those master signs so that, hey, you get a bonus if you consolidate your signs into one location. Instead of having 8 signs along the road, let's make it one sign, but let's make sure that sign performs its function and gives you an incentive to make that your master sign. The next item is the creative sign program. Creative signs have been a little bit of an issue. We've had this is our a little bit of a history on creative signs. They proposed the sign on the left. We got the sign on the right. This is another one of those creative signs, and this is a third. The issue with the creative sign program is the review criteria within the creative sign program are very subjective, not very objective criteria, and that it goes through council for approval. There is concerns about one, what if council really likes somebody or really hates somebody? Does that make it influence as to how you're going to approve or deny a sign? The other issue here is also, would the council ever say no? If somebody comes in front of you with a sign and they say, it's my creative sign and I really want it to have it, is there anywhere we would say no? If we're never going to say no to it, then why do we even have a sign code? If people can just get around to the sign code by coming to council for a sign. So that's the concerns with the creative sign program. There may be ways to edit the creative sign program to make it more objective and more meeting that intent, but it would be very difficult, especially considering a recent Supreme Court case called Reed versus Gilbert, what makes it very difficult to look at something to determine if it's compliant or not. You can't look at the message on the sign to determine if it's compliant. Basically, is the Reed versus Gilbert in a very, very brief nutshell. There's more nuance to it than that, but that makes the creative sign even more difficult to adjust in a way that would be applicable. So generally speaking, it would just be easier to just go ahead and remove that option. Generally due to Reed versus Gilbert decided, that's the word I'm looking for. It was decided well after the UDC was adopted. And guidance we've received generally is if there's a issue with your sign code that doesn't meet those Reed versus Gilbert determinations, until you can modify it, try and enforce your sign code as appropriately as possible. So we've staff has tried to play down the creative sign program as much as possible to people because we're concerned about its legitimacy, for lack of a better term, or maybe we'll just leave it at that. The last one is a clarification on billboards. Our Unified Development Code uses the term on-premises signs in one section in the billboard section of code. Staff believes that was just an oversight. If read literally, as a bonus, you could have a billboard size sign on any property within 1,000 feet of I-25. That would include all of these residential properties highlighted. Also, if read literally, it would deny anyone from putting up a sign within 500 feet of another sign. So this one subway sign on this building would deny anyone else from having a sign within that 500-foot radius. Staff believes this is not really a sensible solution, and that realistically the inclusion of on-premises signs within that section of code was an oversight. However, people have tried to argue it as an incentive or a bonus in the past, and that's why it's lumped into this amendment, is to clarify that, hey, this is not really a bonus. This is not really something that we're looking at. This is just another example of the 500-foot radius. So that's the ordinance on the whole. Basically just amending a couple of sections of the sign code. But I'm available for questions on any of these, and of course, also willing to receive input and make amendments if council feels that is appropriate.
Okay, any questions from council?
Mr. Chair,
Councilman?
I'm going back to the early discussion on the interstate signs, I believe it was 60 feet and 200 feet recommendation?
Correct. The ordinance in front of you is 60 feet high and 200 square feet in area.
And I'm not sure you know the answer to this, but how would that compare with other jurisdictions? Is that similar? Is that kind of in the ballpark, or are we?
Other
I'm
jurisdictions
just
are.
trying to visualize as I drive on the interstate and I look for a gas sign, I'm kind of.
So other jurisdictions are all over the place, depending on how urban the area is, depending on how strict they are on sign codes. There are some jurisdictions don't allow you anything higher than a monument style sign. No tall pole signs at all. There are other jurisdictions where Laramie, for example, has a regulation that if you're within a certain distance of the interstate, you can have a larger sign. Through weird things that happen in Laramie, technically all signs are monument signs, but you can have like a 60-foot tall monument sign. Don't ask me how all of that went down, but anyway, there's various, so there are other jurisdictions that have other regulations. And one of the things that we found was in Laramie, they didn't put any regulation that your interstate sign had to be on the close part of the parcel to the interstate. So they had people like putting it on the very far side and then subdividing, and now their parcel who's outside of the boundary has a grandfathered sign. So when writing ours, we did try and make it so, you're communicating with the interstate, you put it on the interstate part of your parcel, or the part of the parcel closer to the interstate.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie?
under incentives, section E, near interstate signs, they're allowed an extra freestanding sign. So does that mean each business gets two?
Mr. Chair, so what happens is not all parcels near interstate are abutting the interstate. And historically, we've considered the interstate as a street for the purposes of sign allowances. You're allowed one ground sign per street frontage.
Okay.
So for example, a parcel that is adjacent to the interstate would have, and an interchange and then a third street would have three signs allowed. One for the interstate, one for the exit street, and then one for the side street that parallels the interstate. But not all parcels are adjacent to the interstate, so this is an extra sign for those parcels who aren't adjacent to the interstate. But also in that section, later in that section, we remove the ability to consider your sign near the interstate also. So if you, in the situation where you're actually abutting the interstate, you would instead of getting three, you'd lose one, but you'd gain the extra one. And I just made it more confusing than helpful. So for example, we'll go back to the Maverick site. Maverick has two side streets that they're looking to put signs on. They have lower monument style signs to communicate with traffic on those streets. And then they're putting in this giant tall sign to communicate with the interstate. But Maverick itself is not abutting the interstate, so this sign wouldn't actually be adjacent to the interstate. So they need an extra sign to communicate with the interstate.
Okay, so the extra sign then is their tall sign, and then they get to keep the monument.
Right.
Lower
Correct.
profile signs.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, further questions from committee?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman,
Councilman.
well, Mr. Lloyd, this is fascinating to me and quite comprehensive. Could we go back to the Lincoln Way Pond sign? Did I catch that correctly, that was a council approved?
It was, I was gonna
Creative
give the
sign.
background on that when we got to discussion. If you want to hear it now, I'll
I'll be
share.
glad.
All right, so, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to see the creative sign program go away. When that was presented to us, that was the explanation, the example used was to see more signs like the signs on the Wrangler, which were iconic and different. And if somebody came up with a sign like that, they ought to get some credit for doing that. And that was what was given to us. However, since then, the Lincoln Way Pond sign, Mr. Mason came to council because it had been denied by staff and said, no, this is a creative sign because of the three golden orbs are an ancient historic sign of a pawn shop or a pawnbroker. And so I got a history lesson that night, but that was about the extent of it. But that's why it's a creative sign to Mr. Mason. Nobody, I think I was the only one that voted no on it that night. As staff said, nobody on council was willing to tell Mr. Mason it wasn't a creative sign, so they voted to approve it under the creative sign program.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lakeman.
and which Mr. Mason are you referring to?
John Mason, who owns Lincoln Way Pond. I think that's his name.
I see. I was thinking of another
Oh, you were
Mr. Mason.
Got
I was
it.
wondering about that. So could you tell me when this happened? It must have been, I don't recall it.
I want to say it was at least 7 years ago.
So we haven't had, Mr. Chairman, so we haven't had any usage of the creative sign in the recent past. Is that correct?
The two we've ever had come through council were this Lincoln Way Pond and the sign at the Little Theater Playhouse up by East High. And the reason we approved that one was because it didn't face the neighborhood with the lighting. It faced either East High or it faced the park across the street. So we didn't think that that would have an impact on the neighborhood.
Mr. Chair, may I jump in here just for a moment? We've actually had 4 creative sign submittals, one of which is the Deneen Building, one of which is it was the Little Players Theater sign, one of which was Lincoln Way Pond sign, and the third one was the business park signs for the Camp Stool Business Park, whatever it's called out there. And the issue with both the Lincoln Way Pond sign and the Shine Little Players sign, the reason it needed some sort of relief was because they wanted larger EMCs. So back when these were approved, the EMC allowances was very tight. After receiving both this one and this one, staff proposed an EMC allowance amendment, and so now our EMCs are allowed much larger. So that takes away that incentive to try and, I want a larger EMC, so I'm gonna go through a creative sign program just to get my EMC. So that we addressed one of those issues that way, and hopefully by addressing the master sign issue, we wouldn't necessarily need to go through the creative sign program for this, because this was largely to get the master sign in. So that is, and the Lincoln Way Pond sign is actually the most recent creative sign submittal that we've had. It has been since at least, I want to say it was 2016 that we had this application. However, in light of the concerns of objectivity in the creative sign program and the Reed versus Gilbert Supreme Court case, staff has been, for lack of a term, burying the creative sign program, trying not to go through that process again, because it could open us up for legal action depending on how depending on exactly how that gets passed or not passed. So that is definitely a concern, and we're trying to address that with this amendment here.
Any further questions from committee?
Chairman. Mr. Lloyd, maybe I can visit with you at some point, when you bring in, are you talking about the US Supreme Court?
Yes.
That's a fascinating element here, and I'd like to understand it better. So maybe we can see if we can't get together and go over this, because I also have questions of concern about the other elements of the existing sign code. I appreciate the effort you've made to show us those specific issues. So hope to visit with you sometime soon. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions for staff? Seth, I just have a couple of quick ones. First one is on the height of a sign, like those freestanding highway signs. Is the height, let's say 57 feet, is that to the bottom of the pole and then the sign on top of it is an additional, or is it to the top of the sign?
Mr. Chair, through you, the height of a sign is from the ground at the location of the sign to the top of the sign cabinet. So from ground to the top of the sign cabinet, if we say 60 feet, it has to go from the ground level to 60 feet up at the top of the sign cabinet.
Okay, and the second one is the electronic signage. I didn't see anything in here that really dealt with it, because I remember when we did the Lincoln Way Pond, that was part of the biggest issue was that EMC. So there's a church on 19th going east off of Warren that has electronic signage now. What encompasses that?
Mr. Chair, electronic message centers are now allowed at 40% of the allowed sign area for any monument style sign and at 25% of the allowed sign area for any freestanding sign, and then also on walls or canopies at 32 square feet. So because walls are so big and variable, we thought it was more appropriate to do just a flat regulation for those types of EMCs. Before, when the Lincoln Way Pond sign and the Shine Little Players theater sign were approved, I think the EMC allowance was like 15% and only on monument style signs. I mean, it was tiny in terms of that allowance. So we definitely opened that up after those creative signs went through.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comments for our staff? Any public comment? Public comment? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve.
Second,
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee?
Mr. Chair. You want to go?
Doctor?
I'll yield.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I can see the need for the 60-foot interstate sign in a commercial area. Yeah, I'm thinking of Camp Stool. I mean, it's primarily commercial right there. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm trying to visualize it at I-25 and Vandehigh where it's surrounded by homes. And I'm just wondering what impact that would have on the residents in that area or a similar type area. I mean, it could be any residential interchange. But 60 foot and I believe it's 200 square feet of cabinet lit up at night. Man, that could have a pretty dramatic impact. So I'm a little nervous about just a broad brush approval of that. I don't know how we would restrict that in a residential area. But that's my thoughts at this point. Thank you.
Dr. Rennie?
Mr. Chairman, in light of Councilman Seagrave's comments, I was trying to think anything on I was thinking more Central Avenue, but yeah, if we have a sign, how close at Vandehigh, how close is it to a residential area?
Sign could fall over and hit a house.
And perhaps we should put a limitation or an exclusion within so many feet from a residential area.
I mean, I don't know if that's been part of the discussion or not, but.
Mr. Lloyd?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Seth Lloyd with the Planning and Development Department once again. We could definitely write something in where if a property is within a certain distance of a residential zone or the sign has to be a certain buffer from a residential zone, that is something that we could amend. I would note that we do require the sign to be on the part of the parcel closer to the interstate. So like there's a loaf and jug there at Vandehigh and I-25. If they were to use this regulation, they would have to put their sign on the half of their parcel closer to the interstate. They couldn't put it on the side closer to the residential homes. I would also note that they currently have a sign that I'm pretty certain doesn't meet requirements now. It's probably over 20 feet in height and it's probably over 270 square feet in area. I haven't actually gone out and measured it to determine exactly what that height and area is, but it's already larger than our current sign code allows. So trying to find that right balance, maybe we shrink it by a little bit in height, or maybe we shrink it a little bit in area when it comes within a certain distance to the residential zone. We could possibly write something like that into the code as well.
Yeah, that may be something I'll look at. The east side state is a little, I realize it's fairly close to Yeah, well, it's a little more developed commercially, but there's still some homes nearby. On the west side of the interstate, there's just the one gas station and it's surrounded, I mean, it's got homes right next to it, so. um, So yeah, that may be something we should consider.
Sitting in your backyard on a summer evening, you could be lit up. I mean, you could read a book.
And Mr. Chair, just so that staff gets decent direction on how to maybe craft an amendment here, if that's what you're looking to do. We could look into something like stepped allowances so that as you get further away from residential property, your allowance goes up. So like maybe it's only 30 feet and 100 square feet at the property line of a residential building, and then it goes up as you get further away from the residential property. That's just a hypothetical. I'm not saying that's exactly what we need to do, but we could craft something along those lines so that that might address some concerns where residential properties are close to commercial properties, close to an interstate.
Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rennie.
I think I would like something like that. Does Mr. Lloyd, I know this is only on second reading, is 2 weeks enough, or do you want to postpone it?
Mr. Chair, 2 weeks is enough to craft something for discussion. We might need to postpone after
Okay.
when it comes back to committee, if that's not satisfactory, if we need to get more details or amend it again, we can always postpone after that. But at this point, we can definitely craft something for your review prior to the next committee meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further comments or questions from committee? We have a motion, we have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Number 17, ordinance second reading, amending section 5.1.5 of the Unified Development Code to allow for up to 3 stories for detached dwellings, semi-attached dwellings, and attached dwellings.
Okay, staff report.
All right, hello again. For the record, Sophia Mays. This proposed amendment before you is to allow up to 3 stories for residential properties, principal and accessory buildings in the following lot types: DD1, DD2, DD3, DD4, DD5, DD6, DD7, DD8, single family, SD1, SD2, SD3, duplex, and 81, 82, and 83 townhome. Currently, the UDC allows these lot types to have a maximum of 2.5 stories for the principal building and typically up to 2 stories, but no higher than the principal building for accessory buildings. Staff believes the proposed text amendment to allow up to 3 stories for lower density residential lot types and buildings will allow for higher density and infill in new neighborhoods, increasing residential units and housing type mixes, encouraging affordability due to increased supply of housing, and aligning with the 2021 IRC building code, which our building department has adopted. The 2021 IRC states residential wood-framed buildings are allowed up to 3 stories above grade plane in height for health and safety. While a 2.5-story building fits within this code, most builders simply build 2 stories because the additional half-story isn't really worth the cost of materials. Also, the IRC requirements for half-stories are misaligned with the UDC, rendering almost 100% of half-stories in Cheyenne unhabitable space. In the example presented, an 8-12 roof pitch, 2.5-story would have a difference of less than 7 foot in height for the same roof pitch in a 3-story building. Though it adds less than 7 feet in height, the gains of habitable space are from 0 square feet in the top half-story on the left to almost 1,368 square feet in the top full story of a 3-story home on the right. Additionally, this increase in maximum stories for residential lot types will allow maximum utilization of smaller infill lots that may otherwise not be worth the cost of development, as you can build up instead of out. This is regarding all low-density residential lot types, but specifically SD, duplex, semi-attached, and 80 townhome attached. This will allow both property owners and developers the flexibility to create a diverse housing mix and increase underutilized infill opportunities. Staff feels this is not only important for lots holding duplexes and townhomes, but also single-family homes where the additional square footage will help affordability and increase quality of daily life for young and growing families without increasing lot size requirements. After reviewing the amendments in accordance with the comprehensive plan, Wyoming State Statute 15-1-601, and promotion of the general health, safety, and public welfare, staff concludes this text amendment meets the review criteria of UDC section 2.4.1.d. Staff recommends approval of the text amendment to allow up to 3 stories for residential lot types DD1 through AD3 for principal and accessory building types. Thank you, and I stand for questions.
Any questions from committee?
Mr. Chair, through you,
Councilman Seaver.
I just want to be sure that the fire department doesn't have any issues with this. Have we run this past them?
Chair, through you, yes, we have run this both through the building and the fire department. There were no comments.
Councilman Seagrave, have you seen their new ladder truck?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to haul a hose at 3 stories. I'll
No.
tell you that.
Just saying, okay, go ahead, Dr. Rennie.
Mr. Chairman, I am curious about is a semi-attached dwelling like a townhome? Is that,
It's a duplex. Oh, Chair, through you, it's
okay, so, yeah. Be a duplex and attached dwellings with that, what's it? So what's the definition of attached dwellings if it's not multifamily?
Chair, through you, an attached, the 80 lot type 81 through 83 is a townhome.
Like a
Um,
row house.
Yes, exactly.
All right, thank you, because I never bothered to learn all the DDs and the ADs and STs. You could consolidate that part of the UDC and it'd probably help us. But anyway, okay, still any questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm reading here on the top of page 2 of considerations of the neighbors and their concerns. Is there any consideration in the UDC of those solar rights that might come into play here?
And Chair, members of the committee, Charles Bloom, Planning and Development Director. Way to stump Sophia. The solar rights provisions, I believe they're in their municipal code. I think they're in Title 8. If someone were to establish a solar right on an adjacent property, the property next door would be notified of that solar right, and they would have the ability to either protest it or not protest it. If a solar right is approved, it could limit the height of a structure on a specific property. That solar right would trump whatever our Unified Development Code says in regard to height allowances.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilman?
so if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'll have to look at that, the property owner would have to establish the right and be aware that or possibly become aware that this 3-story structure is going to be right next to them. But I'm trying to understand the interface between that application for the 3-story building, the notification to the neighbor, and the neighbor's ability to get that solar right. I mean, that seems kind of might not happen in a real direct way until the structure was built, and then the neighbor is can't get that solar right. Is that correct?
And Chair, members of the committee, it is correct. If that structure is built prior to a solar right being established, they would not be able to obtain a solar right and require that the height be reduced for the structure. It'd be similar with if there's an existing cottonwood tree or something on those lines that already interfered, they would not be granted the solar right. What we can do in advance of second reading is get some additional information regarding the solar right process. It is one that we don't dust off very often here at the city, but is one that we should look at to make sure it actually fits in this scenario and how that actually works with this scenario of height.
Thank you.
Any further questions to both staff? Okay, any public comment? Okay, hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve.
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Any comments or questions from committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Rennie?
I guess I never realized we prohibited three-story homes, but when you drive around, you really don't have any. I grew up in a three-story house in a neighborhood of three-story homes. I see no reason why we should prohibit those structures.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Last item.
Number 24, resolution approving water and or sanitary sewer service by outside user agreement for Robert Grand Prix for the property at Lot 1, Block 1, Green Subdivision, fourth filing, Laramie County, Wyoming, east of Ridge Road and north of and adjacent to Green Court.
Staff report.
Chair and members of the committee, Connor White, Planning and Development Department. The outside user agreement before you is for a property that is located just north of Dell Range and east of Ridge Road. This is within a county pocket that is on our list to annex, but the property itself is not currently eligible for annexation on its own. The properties that are south of Green Court on the map, those are all within the county. So those would have to annex prior to this property being able to annex. The property owner is requesting this outside user agreement so they can develop the lot with a single family home. There is utilities already in this area, so we do have water and sewer throughout this subdivision with other, it looks like other outside user agreements in the area. So there would not need to be any additional infrastructure that would need to be built. It'd basically just be tapping into existing infrastructure at this point. Being this is on the list of county pocket annexations, until that property is annexed, it will be charged the 1.5 times rate through BOPU. And then once it is annexed, it would then drop down to the city's rate. Because there is existing infrastructure and it is within a county pocket that will be annexed in the near future, staff does recommend approval of this outside user agreement, and I stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Everybody's like, okay, Dr. Rennie.
Connor, can you go to this map?
Yep.
So the orange doesn't represent city?
So we actually, Chair through you, there is a different layer you can turn on, which is there's a city layer.
Not on my, not on my packet.
So yes, I don't, unfortunately, sorry, I did not provide that in the packet, but I'll zoom out a little bit. Everything in red is the city.
Okay.
So everything that is not highlighted in red is still within the county. So
Alright. So
this property isn't adjacent to city limits. Otherwise, we probably would have required that annexation rather than an outside user agreement, but it's not able to be annexed at this point in time because
Right.
you would have to jump some other properties.
that was my confusion with this map. I thought the orange represented city and I thought, wait, it's adjacent on the west side. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
where are we at this particular area as far as our annexation? We haven't done any county pocket annexation for a while.
So, Mr. Chair, through you, I can let Charles take this question. I do know where we're going next. Unless you want to fill in, I can go to the map.
Chair, members of the committee, we're presently working with the surveyor right now to prepare the annexation map for an area that's located south of Ridge and to the west, or sorry, south of Dell Range and generally to the west of Ridge Road. Those maps are expected to be completed within the next few weeks, and then we do intend to have another neighborhood outreach meeting. On the heels of that, we have an annexation that will occur to the east of this area along Dell Range, picking up the pockets north along the city's project. We're doing the Dell Range construction. That is the next area. And then the one that will follow on the heels of that will be the remainder of the pockets are located between US 30 and generally Rollins Street in that area immediately to the east of the highlighted area. After that, then we intend to move up north to the Merritt subdivision, which is where this is, and then picking up a couple of the other pockets to the south. Right now, we're working with county elections to make sure our effective dates don't conflict with the upcoming elections. So we will be bringing forward a couple of annexation ordinances, and those ones would have effective dates that would put in with approval and effective dates around December 1st to 15th, somewhere in that time frame. It would just be after elections.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Seagrave.
So 2025, this would be on the annexation list.
Chair, through you to Councilmember Seagrave. Yes, we would believe we can have that by 2025.
Councilman Laybourne.
Mr. Bloom, could you explain a little bit more about the election responsibilities or concerns that would impact this concept of bringing in these county pockets?
And Chair, members of committee, the concerns with the elections are each individual county pocket is its own precinct. So if you have a county pocket with 1 or 2 residents in there, there are concerns with ballot secrecy, voter secrecy, because one can determine how a person may have voted. The clarification, the annexation of the last county pocket removed a lot of the concerns of the county clerk because they had a lot of concerns with ballot privacy in the past.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from committee or staff? So if he decided, Grand Prix decided he wanted to annex in, he couldn't do it because he's not contiguous, is that right?
Mr. Chair, through you, that is correct. He would basically have to have one of the properties, basically the property to the south of this one on the other side of Green Court, annex as well, and then you would be able to link up. But because it's not continuous or I hate that word. Anyways, because it's not adjacent to city limits, he would not be able to annex at this point in time.
So we can't jump annexing.
Mr. Chair, through you, no, we cannot.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments for staff? Okay, any public comment? No public comment. May I have a motion, please?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Had a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from committee?
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Seagrave.
I am generally very reluctant to vote for an outside user agreement. However, understanding that this is going to be in our upcoming annexation of county pockets, I don't really see that denying this one would, cause any irreparable harm, and it does bring hopefully another property online. So against my better judgment, I'm going to support it.
And along with your comment, I'm the same way. I hesitate to vote for these, but this one, it's not setting a precedent. It's not going to make us look back at different decisions we've made. So knowing, like you say, it's going to come into our annexation packet, I will be a yes on this one also. So any further comments or questions from committee?
I just want to thank Mr. Grand Prix for sitting through an hour and a half of riveting discussion.
So did we. Okay, any further comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. If there's no further business before the Public Services Committee, we are adjourned.